Hi, I'm Jake. I'm with the Rise Collective, and I'm really excited to be talking with Mrs. Scruff today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Mr. Scruff. It's Thursday at We Out Here, and I'm incredibly excited to be talking to the Rise Collective.
I wanted to start really broadly and just ask you what importance music has for you in your life or has had since you were young on not in a not from a career perspective, but just for you, I guess on a more emotional level.
Oh, yeah, that is broad. I think for me, music, especially initially listening to other people's music, is it signified possibility. It was like, because I think music that captures you has something about it is some kind of element of mystery. There is a concept that has been executed for a reason. You're attracted to it because that concept has been executed well, and then you're like, what's this concept? You know what I mean? I think that's kind of how my brain works when I listen to music. It's about curiosity, and I want to know about that music. I want to hear it again, but I also want to find out why that music exists. So I think it's, somebody's basically issued a statement, be it instrumental or with lyrics or whatever, and it has a sense of purpose to it. And then that's what pulls you in. That's what intrigues you, and that's what entices you to explore further. And obviously, you end up going into that person's world or a particular genre, and then you get swallowed up in this amazing dynamic that you've kind of stumbled into. You know what I mean? It's yeah. For me, it's just endless possibilities of just like, I love this. What is it?
Thanks. Um, I wanted to relate that back to a particular word you use, which is mystery, and how I feel like mystery plays resembles curiosity in a lot of ways, but I feel like this kind of essence of mystery is very important in I not only what music you find interesting, but the creative process as a whole, whether that's music or whether that's art or anything. And I was wondering how that impacts your creative process, this kind of idea of mystery.
I suppose it's like, if something's mysterious, it's slightly elusive. And I think with any art, you're not aiming for perfection. Um, and it's, you're approximating an idea, you're bringing something to life to your best ability, and then you're sharing that with someone, and they've got to kind of decode it. It's almost like I've got this feeling here. I'm gonna make a physical or musical manifestation of this feeling, and then I'm going to give that to you with no explanation, and then you've got to somehow decipher it. And obviously there can be some clues, there can be some context. Sometimes that's great, other time, it depends, because something that you're really familiar with as a concept or a piece of music is completely new to me. So it's just like your everyday could be my mystery and vice versa. You know what I mean? So I think it's not necessarily something to be solved, but it's perhaps something to be understood. Because I think if you're like, all right, there's something which has completely captivated me, and I want to connect with it in some way. And that could be, I might be able to meet the musician, or I might be in a venue where something live is taking place, maybe in the company of people who are more familiar with what that music is and why it exists, and I'll get it because it's in the context. It's more 3D as the whole community's there. You know what I mean? It's, everyone's been in the venue where they'll walk onto a dance floor and everyone's singing the words to a song. You're like, I've never heard this. That to you is mystery, and to everyone else, it's like, well, that's that, and you're like, that's that what? Oh, wow, okay. And then they welcome you, and it's just like, I think that whole it introduces you to people, to different kind of levels of feelings and experiences, because behind any piece of art or any food dish or anything that's been created for a purpose, there's a reason. That could be a practical reason, that could be a historical reason, it could be we have limited resources or means. We only have this, and we made this, and isn't that amazing? You know what I mean? But then that's a story of resourcefulness. It could be a story of migration. It could be a story of um, just tradition, and illustrates something about that tradition, which might explain as to why that tradition is so. You know what I mean? So for me, it's about connecting people together, and people are sending these messages out, and they are received, and they're intercepted by different sets of ears, and it's just like, I don't know. For me, it's the possibility of all these infinite messages that are being spread around the world. Same with books. There's only kind of like a finite amount of words, but they can be put in an infinite order, and when it's done well, it pulls you into their world. And sometimes you're like, I love that, but I don't know why. And it's just been out of reach of being able to pin it down, which I think is quite a nice place to be.
I really resonate with the idea of curiosity as something that is not there to be solved. Um, and it feels like it's curiosity is something that's an open-ended question. It feels a lot more for me like that than that. It feels like something that's received and receptive rather than analytical. Um, and I suppose for me, often there seems to be these two rivers that we have to navigate. One of which with music is, as an artist, you have your personal curiosities and your personal paths and ways that places you find yourself in. You're like, oh, I don't know how I've ended up here, but I find this interesting and I feel like this resonates with me and I want to make music from here. How do you couple that with what you feel like would resonate with other people, and how easy is it to stay connected to what you find resonant when when you're feeling into maybe what other people might want, or also what might sell better, and if that plays any role in your process or comes into your thought process as you're making music?
Um, I think, yeah, there kind of are two rivers, like you say, but I also think that when you are communicating, or you're creating a piece of art, or you're trying to nail a concept, I don't think it's sort of like that whole sort of personal curiosity or personal thing that you're trying to bring to life versus how people will receive it. I think there will always be an aspect of that. The same way while I'm talking to you, I'm looking for your reactions. If I was writing a speech that I was going to say in front of people or prepare something, I would obviously be thinking about how it will be received. I think that's subjective versus objective. You know what I mean? But I think generally when you have got an idea and you're in the studio or you're DJing, I think DJing is easier because you see how it's received instantly, and you have a feeling, and you're in the room with everyone else, and it's like, it's not communal, but it is. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things happening simultaneously, and I think creative people are generally really good at processing an amount of things at the same time. And I think once you are in that kind of flow state, or as a creative zone, you're not necessarily thinking how that's going to be received, because you're not really processing that kind of uh, sort of an external objective view of what you're doing. You're just like that. What, you're in your own world. You're managing to entertain yourself. And obviously, if you're in a room with a few other people, then that is magnified back at you. And obviously everybody's paying attention to what everybody else is doing and is locked in. But I think even if you're creating music by yourself with some equipment, you are interfacing with that equipment, and actually these are, the the combination of using your kind of technical brain and your creative brain simultaneously, because you can't have one without the other when you're working with some equipment, or even when I'm speaking. I had to learn to speak at some point. So there are all these skills which we kind of, we think about with our pacing, our volume, and eye contact, and body language, and all that kind of thing. It's like this is all happening at once, and it's an amazing amount of information to process. But somehow, when you're in that zone, it just happens not effortlessly, but it's a joyful place to be, and you can tell that what you're doing is kind of pretty much where you want it to go. Or you create the environment, like I'm going to do something today, I've picked some noises, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm in this kind of mood, and then, oh, I like that kick drum, and then you're like, oh, bloody hell, I'll just switch that synthesizer, oh, that'll do, and then you like put some effects on it, and then like 10 minutes later, you're dancing like a toddler, and it's like, how did that happen? Like, you know, 10 minutes ago, I was just going, how does this work again? You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, it's, I don't think it's as kind of simple as this versus that. I think the way that we are forced to kind of present our music in terms of like um, a thing for sale, or a thing to kind of monetize, forces us into um, like taking a view on perhaps how that will be received. But obviously, with that, you're also in danger of um, creating something which is a bit too similar to what other people are doing, and falling into patterns and traps. And actually, generally, as your music becomes less individual, it becomes less appealing because it's less honest. So, what might be perceived as kind of like the latest style that you might have to take a little bit of. Someone else has invented that, and that was their thing to get out of them. Wow, wow, look, and that'll have its own lineage. I think for me, because I'm obsessive about all music from all places, from all eras, I like to be in tune as possible with kind of what this music is and why it exists, and then you can sort of work out whether or not you're being honest when you're doing what you're doing. So, oh yeah, I know that reference point, and or this new music that's being performed on that stage over there. Oh, that harks back to that music, and those performers might not even be aware of that because a lot of that happened before they were born, or they might see music through a different lens or a different route. You know what I mean? There's no correct answer, but I just think for me that the whole creative mind is just fizzing with possibilities, and I think you have your technical hurdles to overcome in terms of learning an instrument or learning software or hardware, and then there's just what you do when you're interfacing with that, and that how um, sort of frictionless that process is. But sometimes problems and how you overcome problems, that brings out your personality as well. You know what I mean? And I think that happens in everyday life. Everyone can deal with something that's really easy, but I think the moment you start to hit some kind of brick wall or an obstacle, it's like, right, well, here's a test of your character. And actually, how you deal with that obstacle and how you surmount that, or maybe go a different route, that will become evident in the end result. You might make a piece of art and fall out of love with it, and then a couple of years later listen to it and go, wow, that it actually starts to get good 4 minutes in. I'll just sack off the first 4 minutes that was really precious about because I invested weeks in it. You know what I mean? It's yeah, it's yeah. I think the whole kind of quandary between creating something and how it's received. Everyone thinks about that at different times as well. You know what I mean? I just think the main thing is if you can create a headspace where you allow that kind of joy to develop, or just so you can just switch off from everything else, switch your phone off, don't look at your emails, give yourself some rules and get stuck in and go, like, how am I going to cope with this? You know what I mean? And that is and then once you kind of let all those distractions go, that's when you get into that headspace, and then you don't care about whether anyone likes it or not, because you're just there like grinning like a loon. You know what I mean? So it's kind of it's yeah. I just think it's like being in a position where you can get into that space and have that joyful experience, and hopefully at some point in the future be able to share that with others, whether it's a live, performance, or as a DJ going, like, I made this in the studio and you can tell I was buzzing. You know what I mean? You can tell that from art. And it's sort of like, but it's really difficult to explain apart from just like, it just feels right. You know what I mean? But it's a lot of work to get that feeling to actually be able to, um, explain that in another realm, be it music or sculpture or whatever. But I think the main thing is like, you make it and but other people are like, what is that? You know, whether it's in a club, when a bass line comes and everyone's like, whoa, and you know that no one's heard it before. And it's like, wow, you can see that it may be something you've been in the studio and you've played it just at the right time. And then people have received it way better than you could have ever envisaged. You know what I mean? You're like, well, and other times it falls a bit flat. It's like, okay, maybe I should go back and tweak it a bit. You know what I mean? But I think the nice thing about being able to DJ as well is you can have that process and then refine it, even if it's just, oh, I just need to turn up the snare a bit or something.
Awesome. Thanks. I yeah, one of the artists I've been listening to a lot over the last year or so is the main singer in Big Thief, Adrian Lenker. And I listened to her recently talk about her creative process, and it's just very, very similar to the way you talk about it. I think she kind of explained it as getting out of her own way. Um, and I guess, I mean, you've kind of already talked about it a bit, but in terms of if there are any tips for actually getting out of one's own way to actually be able to, because the way she described it, she didn't really know like how or why this music was coming out, but it would just kind of come. And I didn't know if you had any tips for just me or anyone else in terms of how you'd find that place in any sort of like creative realm for someone to tap into.
I think one of the things which I'm always quite methodical about is I make sure if I'm DJing or I'm in the studio that all my kind of technical needs in terms of the equipment and setting things up like that, that's done first. That's like a separate process. So if you're on your laptop, it's like, well, have I backed up my hard drive? Have I, all that kind of housekeeping. I think it's keeping on top of that because it keeps you familiar with what you're doing. It's like, oh, because you don't want to be halfway through a tune and like, oh, this plugin needs updating, or oh, I've run out of memory, or oh, my computer keeps freezing because I've only got 2 gig memory left. You know what I mean? So I think basic stuff like that. It's removing, just doing the really boring housekeeping stuff just to make sure that nothing's going to go wrong. And then I think just setting yourself some boundaries, because I think once you create that space of going, right, I'm in the studio at this time, I'm going to switch off all my electronic communications, and I'm going to give myself an allotted amount of time to do something. I think when you take care of these processes, you are reducing the options that are available to you. And then you're giving more of your brain, to just focus on this what you've deemed to be a really important task. And I think the getting out of your own way is almost just like forgetting all the nonsense that you're dealing with all the time, but also not tripping yourself up with, oh, bloody hell, I should have replaced that cable last week, you know what I mean? Or someone's in the studio and you're like, all right, just let me set this keyboard up for you. Oh, I need to change the fuse on the plug, or, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. So just make sure your stuff works. And whatever you are tempted to do when you're working, like checking emails or answering your phone or anything like that, or like, oh, I keep going to make a cup of tea, bring yourself a flask of tea. You know what I mean? But I think just little stuff like that, like everybody knows their own worst habits. It's like try and avoid some of those, set yourself a time limit, maybe give yourself a few rules. Because I think sometimes in the midst of overcoming some creative challenges, not just how does this work, but just like, no, I'm not using that today, or I'm only giving myself 5 minutes to do a beat, you know, and I'm not allowed to EQ or put any effects on until I've like written my tune. All the stuff that maybe because especially with using a DAW, perhaps your mixing and arrangement and composition are kind of intertwined a little bit. Sometimes that's important. Other times you can EQ a snare for 3 hours. You know what I mean? I'll be like, oh damn, I've just had had a loop on that no one's only ever going to listen to more than once, and I've listened to it 4,000 times. I'm going crazy here. So yeah, I think it's just yeah, but I think in the midst of setting yourself maybe a few challenges or giving yourself some limitations, how you deal with that is a different. It's like a kind of technical creativity, and I think when you're using that part of the muscle of your brain, it almost aids you into getting rid of the other barriers. It's like warming up before you go to the gym or something like that. You know what I mean? It's difficult um, to kind of describe the process because sometimes you go in the studio and it just happens. I think sometimes like, how do I turn on this inspiration when I'm not in the mood or I'm preoccupied and stuff? And I think a lot of it's having like just maybe having some kind of ritual or a set of rules or some things to do if you get stuck, or just like every 50 minutes I'm just gonna go out the studio and walk around the block. But even if it's going really well, you know what I mean? I think you just have to like make a few little daft things and stick to it, but then your brain will start to adapt to that, and that'll almost like free up other bits of your brain to kind of, all right, well that's kind of, there's some framework there, I can go wild over here, you know what I mean? And it's because it could be, I think it's more, nutrition, sleep, what mood you're in, what's troubling you, how stressed you are, how much coffee you've had, you know what I mean? It's all the stuff which, sometimes you might be watching a performance here. One day you might get lost in it, and the next you might, oh, I forgot I went to go and meet my mate, or you know what I mean? It's just like other stuff gets in your way. It's not you just getting in your own way. It's sometimes other stuff you've not done. So it's just like just get rid of all that and just go right. I am scheduled in the studio or my rehearsal room between these hours. This is work. Because I think a lot of people are really good at like fulfilling obligations for other people, but not necessarily for themselves. And I think it's just finding some kind of framework that works for yourself, or that you maybe get someone else to check that you're doing it. And then yeah, just go for it. But I'm bad. I'm really kind of I always beat around the bush and do other stuff before I go, oh, let me just put that wash on. I better do the washing up. Oh, I better go to the shops, take the dog for a walk. Oh, really just put those socks in pairs. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're avoiding getting into it. So I think it's just like, no, this is an important task. Let me do it. Just because it's enjoyable, it doesn't mean it's not important.
I think I have one more question. Um, and it was yeah, it's following on from that. Um, for someone who has lost touch with their sense of curiosity or creativity, you spoke of rituals or just habits, or they can be much less profound, but just like anything that any tips for just sparking someone's curiosity day to day, they can be simple or they can be really profound. Do you have any that you come to or that you can think of that might benefit someone or yourself when you're in a bit of a rut?
Um, yeah, I just think it's looking after yourself. Sleep, exercise, food. Um, I think the moment you start to apply some discipline, because often people feel less inspired when they're just overwhelmed with stuff, and it's easy to get overwhelmed if you're not maintaining a good kind of physical balance. You know what I mean? You might be like, oh, I work really late, even though I've got to get up tomorrow morning. Or I mean, everyone gets a little bit, up there and has to perhaps, do more than they should rather than taking a bit of break. But I just think like, yeah, drink water, eat fruit and go for a walk and allow yourself some space, but also just fuel your body to just feel all right for a bit. Because I think uh, when you're under it and you're like, you might have to rely on. Sometimes when I'm tired, I might have a bit of too much of a drink when I'm DJing, because you're like, I just need to reach for something that's going to like get me in that zone somehow. You know what I mean? I shouldn't be doing it. I'm aware I'm doing it, and everyone has the times when they're kind of like they lean on something, whether it's sugary food or caffeine or drugs or alcohol or whatever, you know what I mean? Just, or, doom scrolling, or, it's just like sometimes it's a bit of a reflex. When you're not feeling right, you reach for what's just going to make you feel worse. But in the moment, it gets you what you want, you know what I mean? So I think, yeah, it's a health thing, having some kind of um, just structure and routine regarding your own well-being. Um, and same again, just make, if you're a bit rubbish at it, either like writing it down or saying to other people, just make sure I eat a banana every morning, or, all that kind of thing. It's just, yeah, I think health is such, often creative problems aren't due to, the creative realm. They're due to what else is going on in your life, and everyone's, there's so much going on in the world at the moment, and I think it's just, you need to be able to look after yourself, look after the people around you, and then I think those interactions and that diligence will, same again, it's just having that structure in place, and then the creative brain's like, ooh, and then and then it'll just come back. It's weird, it doesn't, it's something that comes often when the time is right. But when the time is right, you're not going, what steps did I get to make that right time? And sometimes you can be knackered and still be on a right buzz and have an amazing time in the studio. But normally, if you're knackered in the studio, it's like, no, just go and, eat some soup or something. I think it's just, yeah, just look after yourself. That's the most important thing, I think.
Last small question. Um, is there any creative practice or adventure that you would really, really like to do, just that is totally different from music?
Um, I'd like to get better at writing. I think although I go on a bit, I'm quite good at explaining what gets me excited, but I'd love to be able to do that in words. I'd love to be better at cooking. I can nail a few dishes, but you know what I mean? I think when you see somebody else who's just been doing something for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and they just live it and breathe it, and you're like, I can get like 25% there if I try really hard, and you're just doing it like that. You know what I mean? I think like, yeah, I think the writing thing is, um, I'd love to be able to write as fluidly as I think and talk. Um, yeah, I think that's probably quite enough.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak.